Hey guys, so I said that I would read some Serafina, the Black Cloak, for you. And I just wanted to go ahead and do that real quick. If you hear Ford, he's next door. And yeah, Marla Claire's over there doing her schoolwork. So I'm going to try to get us a good chapter in, okay? It was so good to see all of you guys. I miss you so much. So thank you for all of you that joined. If you didn't get to join us, we're going to schedule another one for next Tuesday, okay? All right. So the last thing we read was that Serafina was on to Mr. Thorne. Remember that? All right. But she says there was something more as well, something that obsessed Mr. Thorne that drove him even beyond Braden. More and more he had to take a child every night, any child, and she'd use the need against him. She would meet him face to face on the most deadly battlefield she could think of. She would defeat him once and for all, or she'd die trying. She turned around and headed back toward the estate as midnight approached, and she went down the stairs toward the workshop. It did not surprise her that her pa was asleep on his cot, snoring gently, exhausted from a long and difficult day. But then she saw something lying on her makeshift bed, behind the boiler. As she stepped toward it, she realized it was the dress that Braden had given her. Braden must have come down and laid it there while she was gone. There was a note attached. S. A and you are determined. I'm leaving early in the morning with tea. I'll see you in a few days. Please stay safe until I return. B. Serafina stared at the note. She didn't want to believe it. He was really going to do what his aunt and uncle wanted. But then she looked at the dress. She was sure it wasn't Braden's intention, but it was perfect addition to her plan. Now she would look the part. The time for sneaking and hiding was over. She was going to make sure one man in particular saw her. And tonight was the night. The chief rat catcher had a job to do. Chapter 20. Chapter 20. All right, I'm going to read chapter 20, and then I'll jump on another night and read chapter 21. All right. Serafina put on the beautiful dark maroon winter gown that Braden had given her the night before. The intricate black barricade corset felt tight around her chest and back, and she worried that when it came time to fight, it would restrict her. She twisted and turned to test her freedom of movement. The long skirt hung heavily around her legs, but even as unfamiliar as the girl's clothing felt, she couldn't help but be taken by it. It felt almost magical to be putting on a dress for the first time in her life. The material was fine and feminine and soft, like nothing she'd ever worn before. She felt like one of the girls in the books she read, like a real girl, with a real family, with brothers and sisters and a mother and a father and friends. She quickly scrubbed her face and brushed her hair and made herself as pretty as she could. It felt silly, but she needed to look the part. She tried to imagine that she was going on to an extravagant dance in a ballroom crowded with glittering ladies and gentlemen and boys who would ask her to dance. But she wasn't, and she knew it. When she thought about the place she was going and the dark forces she'd met there, it felt like she was jumping a chasm and she wasn't going to make it to the other side. She tried to block it out of her mind and just kept lacing up her dress in the back with her shaky fingers, but she was having a terrible go of it. Normal girls must have extremely long and bendy arms to do this every night, she thought. When she was finally done, she looked around at the workshop one last time. She couldn't tamp down the feelings that she wouldn't be coming back. She looked over to where her pa lay sleeping. She had seen how tired and overwhelmed he was. His struggles with the dynamo and searching for these last few days had taken a toll on him. She wanted to curl up in the crook of his arm like she used to, but she knew she couldn't. Sleep well, Pa, she thought. Finally, she gathered her courage and turned. She made her way through the basement and then climbed the stairs to the first floor. At the top, she paused. She took a deep breath and then walked down the darkened corridor of the house. She walked slowly, deliberately, not darting and hiding like she normally did, but walking down the center of the wide hallway like a proper young lady. She walked like the girl she had watched from the shadows and so many times over the years. She did everything she could to take on the appearance of the helpless young daughter of one of the guests. She was no longer a predator. She was a vulnerable girl. The air was very still. Moonlight shone in through the windows, falling on the marble floor. The grandfather clock in the entrance hall chimed off the 12 bells of midnight. The corridors of the house were mostly empty because it was so late, just a candle here or there to light the way for guests, but she sensed that there was a few people still awake. As she made a low promenade in her long, wide dress through the broad corridors of the house, it felt deeply strange not to be hunting, not to be the eyes of the predator, but the prey that is seen. Her stomach churned, her muscles flinched and twitched, begging her to dash away. She hated walking straight, and she started walking slowly. You're a normal girl, she told herself. Just keep breathing. Keep pulling into air into your lungs. You're a normal girl. It took every ounce of courage she had to just keep walking a straight line in the open. She'd come up against the man in the black cloak before, but she was determined to make this time different. Tonight, she was going to fight. Fight on her own terms and in her own way, with tooth and claw. She lingered near the winter garden with its high glass ceiling, just outside the door into the billiard room where she knew from when she learned at Miss Vanderbilt's gathering earlier that evening she had the best chance of setting her trap. Suddenly the door of the billiard room opened. Mr. Vanderbilt, Mr. Bendel, Mr. Thorne, and several other gentlemen were sitting together in the leather chairs and drinking out of odd-shaped glasses. The smell of cigar smoke wafted into the corridor. Mr. Pratt came out of the room with a large silver tray balanced on his hand and hurried down the hall. Serafina stepped into a shadow behind a column to avoid being seen, and there she waited, lingering on the edge of darkness. She was a china doll, and she was a wraith in and out of the shadows, a girl in between. Finally, the fireside chat began to break. Mr. Vanderbilt stood, and she said good night to each of the guests. Mr. Rendell shook everyone's hand and then retired as well. In the end, only Mr. Thorne remained. Serafina watched him through the open door, her heart pounding slow and heavy, and he sat in the candlelit billiard room alone, sipping from the glass and smoking his cigar. Come on out, she thought. We have business to attend to. But he seemed to be enjoying a moment of personal triumph. She couldn't read his mind, but she tried to piece together what she knew about him and imagine what he was thinking at that moment. After losing his plantation in the war and falling into the depths of ruin, he was now, finally back to his rightful place again, a distinguished gentleman of the highest order, a personal friend of one of the richest men in America. All he had to do was to get here was to steal the souls and talents of 100 lousy children with small, frail bodies and their pliable spirits. But she wondered, why didn't he absorb adults as well? Were they more difficult? And now that he had achieved his position in society, why did he continue with his attacks and his risk discovery? If he'd been doing this for a long time, then why the sudden greed for young souls? What was driving him to absorb a child night after night? It had to be more than just the pursuit of talents. If it had to be more than just the pursuit of talents, it had to be a need, a greater than anything that had come before. She watched Mr. Thorne as he sat on the sofa, puffing on his cigar and sipping his cognac. There was nothing different about him tonight. His face looked gray. The skin under his eyes were wrinkled and flaky. His hair seemed less shiny and perfect than it did the morning in the tapestry gallery when she saw him for the first time, or when he arrived with a rescue party to take Braden back to the Biltmore. Mr. Thorne set his empty glass on the end table and stood. Serafina's muscles tensed. The time had come. Like the other gentleman, he wore a formal black jacket and tie, and she could hear the movement of his patent leather shoes on the billiard room's hardwood floor. But when she saw what he was carrying draped over his arm, his breath caught in her throat. Her breath caught in her throat. It was the black cloak, satin and shimmering and clean. The cloak was as much in disguise as she was. To anyone else, it was but a fashionable covering. To anyone else, it might have appeared that the handsomely attired gentleman intended to take a quiet stroll in the grounds before he retired for the evening. But she knew the truth. It wasn't just a cloak. It was the black cloak, which meant he was bent on malevolent purpose. Here was her enemy. Here was the fight she'd come for, but she could feel her whole body quaking in her gown. She was scared to death. At least I'm going to die in a party dress, she thought. He walked out of the room and into the corridor where Serafina was hidden in the shadows. He stayed perfectly still, but then he stopped just outside the billiard room door. He could not see her, but he could sense her there. He stood just a few feet away from her. Her heartbeat pounded. She had trouble controlling her breathing. He was right in front of her. All her well-laid plans seemed foolish now. She wanted to cower away, to flee, to slink, to hide, to scream, but she steadied herself. She forced herself quiet, and she did what for her was the most terrifying thing to do in the world. She stepped out into the open. Chapter 21. All right, friends, so I'm going to leave you hanging in true Miss Dickerson form. I hope all of you are doing really well. Do not forget, if you need anything, you can email me. You can message me on Blooms. And for parents, I have a Miss Dickerson's class Facebook page that I can post things. So I miss you guys so much. Thank you for all that you're doing. Thank you for working hard, all of you. I love all of you guys, and I will see you soon, hopefully. Talk to you later. Love you guys. Bye.